Captain Peter Cutsie, South Korea, and this is my briefing room. Welcome back to part 2 of FMC failure. In part 1, we learned how to recognize and deal with a single FMC failure, whether it be the captain's FMC or the first officer's FMC. And we dealt with it and we looked at a checklist. In part 2, we're going to look at a dual FMC failure. We're assuming now we've just lifted off of runway 08 left at Muscat, OOMS, and we're en route to Dubai, a short, roughly 52-minute flight, and in an RNAV environment, remember. So here we are, boom, we've lost both FMCs right after liftoff. So pilot flying, fly the airplane. You've got your primary flight displays. You don't have a map. Let's find out just on a little quick review of what we're actually going to see and not going to see. Both captain's nav display and first officer's nav display are blank as far as a map is concerned, with the appropriate alert flags. And we discussed VTK would come on immediately, then the map would come on roughly 10 to 15 seconds later. But what we didn't talk about before, and I want to mention now because it's important, is you've got a lot of white here on the map. And this is good information. This is the information that you used when you started flying at the beginning of your flying career. And something most 737 pilots forget is the number 2 step when entering a cold airplane is number 1 is you set up the establish electrical power on the buses. And number 2 is to do the preliminary pre-flight procedure. And the first item in the preliminary pre-flight procedure is selecting the IRS mode select switch to align. Then after that, the lights are flashing. You get down and do your preliminary pre-flight and your pre-flight. And before you know it, you've got a picture in front of you. All right. But what you forgot is all this beautiful white information we're going to use today. We have a track. Valid track, and it's a magnetic track of 341 in this case, in this example. We've got a compass rose, we've got a heading, we've got a ground speed, true airspeed, wind direction, wind speed, and a wind direction arrow. Wow, we've also got other information here. We've got a VOR on the left is tuned to MRE at 1.4 nautical miles. This isn't Muscat. This is just an example. And over here on the right VOR, SNE, Sierra November Echo, at 21.9. So you've got a lot of super information already here. So let's think of a dual FMC failure on a positive note of thinking, hey, we've got extra stuff that we never really used when we had all that icing on the cake. Icing on the cake. Where did you hear that before? Well, out of the 70 videos that I put in this package, one of them talks about cake and icing. The cake, remember, is the raw data, the basic navigation that you learned. The icing is the magenta frosting. That's extra. It's sweet and it's extra. But we really should be using the cake to navigate. That's the raw data and the basics of flying. So that's what we're going to use today. And in part 3 and 4 of this series of FMC failure. Okay, so now that you've got that, let's look at 2 other items that you don't have, and both FMC CDUs are blank. All right, we saw that before. Now, let's go to a little slide here. The pilot flying is going to ask the pilot monitoring to set VOR on his or her EFIS panel, because that's what you're going to use next. And I say have the pilot monitoring do it. Pilot flying, focus on flying the airplane, even if the autopilot's engaged. You've got something irregular here. So let's use airmanship. Even though you've got the autopilot engaged, still ask the pilot monitoring to make these selections. That's a suggestion. Make sure you follow your SOPs, but most importantly, be safe. And be safe is ask the pilot monitoring to make selections while you get your head squared away with the map that you don't have. You've got your track. You've got many other neat things. Okay, so you're going to use these two selections, VOR and approach. So here, just a quick review. That is the expanded mode. This is the center mode of VOR, and you've got two needles, and they're important because the head of the needle, the pointer is pointing on a track to the facility it's tuned to with, and this is number two, with the course, of course, is what you, of course, pardon the idiom, is selected on the mode control panel. That's the course that you have selected, or that's selected there already. In this case, it would have been 084. And the DME is the distance that you're at to that facility. This is number two VOR. And this is the track that you're on, but this is your heading. So you have to think that way. This is the number one facility tune. All right. And so you've got a lot of neat information. Let's have a look at the approach mode while we're at it. That's this mode. You're going to use these two selections. Right now, you're going to use VOR to get set up in the holding. And then later on in part three, we're going to use the approach mode. All right. So we are going to go back now. And this is the approach mode in the expanded, and this is the approach mode in the center mode. Let's go back now to the main menu. And let's kind of slip over and let Peter's iPad join this meeting so that we can have a look at what the iPad is going to display for us that I've got pre-set up. And we want to just share the screen, and I'll start a broadcast here. We should have it in approximately 1 second. And then I'll bring in a PDF file that I'm sharing with you. And this should come up now very shortly. And here is the approach that we are going to be executing at Muscat. We're going to return to land because we can't go en route in an RNAV environment. The captain has probably asked the first officer to declare a PAN and communicating. Remember, you aviate, you navigate, then you communicate. So we're aviating now. We're going to navigate back to the VOR using heading select to start with until we get a track. So the captain or the pilot flying is going to ask the pilot monitoring to tune the Muscat VOR 114.5. So he or she will tune both VOR 1, VOR 2 to 114.5, and then start the course selector to something that you think is going to be the inbound track by looking at the needles I showed you. Remember, you're going to start a turn through 180 degrees because the VOR is behind you. It's south of the threshold of runway 08. Here it is here, south of the threshold. You're over here. You're flying out here. Okay. So you're going to turn left and come back. So when you come back, your track is going to be perhaps inbound of 23, 240, 230, whatever. But do the turn in a minimum radius. That is, stay at your flaps up speed. Don't accelerate, clean up, but maintain your flaps up speed, which is going to be very close to your holding speed. Wow. We know that because we know what VREF 40 is at our max landing weight. So in any case, let's say we're under our max landing weight. So you're going to be fine at 210 knots for a speed somewhere in that area, which is a good reference speed. And you'll find that's very close to a holding speed, very, very close to a holding speed. All right. So you're flying the airplane, and then you communicate that you want to come back to the VOR, you're in a PAM situation, and you want to hold and request a holding of an inbound course of 280, which is 100 degrees. And the only reason why I say that is if you look up here, when we do the approach for a 180 knot airplane, which is us, as far as maximum speed is concerned, our track or course outbound here for the full localizer approach is 280. So why not hold inbound on a course of 280? So you've already got your courses set on your MCP. So when you're ready after 2 or 3 or 4 turns in the holding pattern, you're all set. One step is completed. We're going to do that in part 3 of this briefing. Okay. So you've got airborne, you're flying the airplane, and don't forget that you've got to do an after takeoff procedure, and that's done when the flaps are up and the lights are out, and at a convenient time. Well, it's going to be convenient to get it done pretty quick. So the pilot monitoring is going to do the after takeoff procedure, then the pilot flying is going to call for the after takeoff checklist while you are in a turn after you've made that request with ATC. When you're making the turn in a minimum radius back to the VOR, and you can see those pointers on your nav display pointing to the VOR. So you know what your track is going to be when you roll out. And as soon as you've established that, because you're in heading mode now, go to Vorlog. And you will go to Vorlog green capture on the PFD. And now you've got the autopilot engaged. The autopilot will track that track to the VOR. Then as you come up for station passage, go to heading select. And then when you have station passage, you're going to go into a right turn because that's what you're requesting. So here's what your request is, roughly drawn in by yours truly. And how are you going to do the timing? Well, you're going to do the time. You don't have prog 424, that beautiful magic page on your CDU. Prog 24 gave you your headwind component, crosswind component, tailwind component, all that neat stuff. Well, you don't have it anymore. That's the frosting. It's gone. That's the sweet part. It's gone. You've got the cake. And you've got all the formulas you learned, and that I'm going to give you some from my Royal Canadian Air Force days in 1959. And one quick one, just try to remember this, write it down, but I'll show it to you on the screen in one of our parts later, is your maximum drift formula is 60 over your true airspeed times the wind speed. Well, you have the wind speed. It's on the top left corner of your nav display. You've got it. Okay. So a quick way to remember that is 60 over your true airspeed. Well, use 180 roughly for the approach and for holdings, low-level holdings. So you're looking at basically 1/3. 60 over 180 is 1/3. So 1/30 of your wind speed. Let's say your wind speed was 21 knots. To make it simple, your drift, your maximum drift is 7 degrees. So at the very maximum, at 90 degrees, you're going to drift 7 degrees. Wow. So you're going to use that as you go upbound, and maybe because you're going to be 1 minute outbound because you're below 14,000, you are going to take a timing and then start your turn inbound. And as you're turning inbound, have a look at the pointer, the VOR pointer, and you're going to see your track. And as you approach a 45 intercept in your turn on heading cell, arm Vorlog. And allow the out-of-flight systems to intercept and fly the radial, the 100 radial. As you approach station passage, heading select. And as you go by, turn the heading bug to the right to a heading that you think will maintain. Remember, let's say the wind was 90 degrees to your track at that level. So you're going to drift 7 degrees max. So 08 should say 100 is your outbound track. So if you started with perhaps 093 or maybe 090, and then see what your actual track was. If your track wasn't 100, adjust your heading to maintain a track of 100 outbound. We fly tracks. We don't fly headings. Then note your heading. Write it down up here, because on the next turn, you're going to go to that heading. And guess what? Hey, this is pretty neat. We're maintaining a beautiful racetrack pattern without a map. All right. You aviated after takeoff. You navigated towards the holding, and you're setting up the holding in your head. You did it on the tuning the frequencies on both VORs, setting the course selections on both course selectors to the same, and you've established yourself in a hold. You've talked to the right people. You've talked to the flight attendants. You did the after takeoff procedure, after takeoff check, descent procedure, descent checklist, the approach procedure, and the approach checklist. But somewhere in there, you had to actually set up the aircraft for the approach. So you would have done that before you did the descent and approach checklist. So you do the setup after you get in the holding pattern for the approach. Then you do the descent and approach checklists. Okay, that's the end of today's presentation. Let's go back and to the main screen. And we'll share this screen with you. And that will be it for today's briefing. Look for part 3, where we actually fly the non-precision full approach, localizer approach, runway 08 left at Muscat. Thanks for watching. See you soon in number 3.